Jane King, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel, and always good to see you. Again, for the audience, Jane and I used to work together in local news in Central Illinois, and Jane now covers Wall Street and has for about 20 years or so, and that is one reason why we are talking to Jane today, because today, as we tape this, is the anniversary of the attacks of 9/11. And Jane, you were down on Wall Street on that morning, and that's one of the things we want to be talking to you about. Bring us
Yes.
back and just tell us, what did you experience on the morning of 9/11, 2001?
So I was working for CNN at the time, and I worked on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and just a kind of a normal day. And I had a producer who was with me, and we saw on TV, which is kind of crazy because we were only about 4 or 5 blocks away from the World Trade Towers, that there had been a plane that hit the tower. And we were kind of trying to figure it out. I remember I printed out some of the really early wire copy that day. That was very vague. There was some speculation somebody maybe had a seizure or a heart attack. It was a small plane, was what they were calling it. So, and then as the morning went on, of course, we started to learn what really happened. There was a commercial airliner, that there was a second one, that there was also an attack on the Pentagon in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And I remember that day, I remember a couple of things. I remember thinking, please don't hit the Statue of Liberty. And I also remember as a younger person then, survived. I just kind of had all these chaotic feelings. And later on in that day, it was becoming clear that we needed to leave the area. And we didn't go back to the stock exchange for the rest of that week. And heroically, the stock exchange reopened again on that next Monday. So 9/11, 2001 was a Tuesday, reopened on that Monday, which was really a Herculean effort to get all of that back up and going again. But Dick Grasso was the head of the stock exchange at the time. He was very determined to make that happen. Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York, also very determined to make that happen. And to watch this 19 years later, I mean, every year we go through the ceremony and we watch it, and some years impact you more than others. I was watching this morning the coverage of that day, and how chaotic it all was. And as the anchors were talking through what was going on, and we were trying to figure it out, and they had guests on to, terrorism experts and politicians and things, everybody was trying to figure it out. And it just really brought you back to that time. And it just still seems so raw, even 19 years later. And you think about everything we've been through between now and then. I mean, financial crises, and, I've started a business, I've had 2 children, we've had a pandemic. I mean, but still very raw feelings about that day.
As you come to us today, you're still in the southern part of Manhattan. In fact, you're only about 2 or 3 blocks away from where the attacks, where the World Trade Centers used to stand. And are you reminded of that much? Or, I mean, and I'm kind of wondering, what is the mentality of New Yorkers living in that area? Do they dwell on the attacks of 9/11, or after nearly 20 years, 19 years as we sit here today, has life kind of returned to normal? And to what extent does it still impact the environment of southern Manhattan?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I go by that area a lot, quite a bit, and you don't think about it too much, except on days like today. And I do think there's plaques at the schools, things like that. So things happen every once in a while, but I do think that people have kind of moved on for the most part. And that's why I think that it's really important that we have days like today. There was controversy about, should we have a ceremony today? We've got COVID. Maybe we should just do a recording. There was a lot of debate about it. But Steven Siller, who started the Tunnel to Towers, his brother was killed on 9/11. He was a firefighter, really pushed that we have a ceremony today, a live ceremony. And he makes the argument that, there's kids, my kids weren't even born in 2001. So they really kind of need to still remember what happened on that day, and all the geopolitical things that have followed, all things we do when we go to the airport still, that are directly related to 9/11. So I think I'm glad that they pushed that. They figured out a way to do it safely, and I'm glad that we still keep this alive. Remember the people that were killed that day. Remember what happened. what led up to it, and try to prevent it from ever happening again.
I have not had the chance to go back and see. Is it called Freedom Tower? Is that right?
We can, yeah, but actually, it's more called One World Trade.
Okay,
But I think Freedom Tower is also a name that's
One World
used.
Trade. So that's the tower that replaced the World Trade Towers, and of course there was about what 7 buildings or so in the
Yeah.
immediate facility that were attacked. Um, what is your impression of those, the memorial site there and the new tower, and to what extent does it add to New York and do justice to the memory of those who died on 9/11?
Yeah, well, we used to, they have a restaurant at the top of One World Trade. We used to go there. It's, you can have lunch there, you can get a cocktail. I mean, it's, kind of amazing. The World Trade Towers also had a restaurant at the top. So I think, and it's a viewing center too. It's a tourist attraction. And when you go up the elevator, it's 110 floors up, maybe a little more. And when you go up the tower to the top in the elevator, it will show you the building of the World Trade. I mean, and it starts like back in the 1600s, and you go up this whole, and it takes you all the way. And then 2001, it shows the towers, the building of the towers. 2001, the tower's gone. It shows the building One World Trade. It's a really well done memorial because it's not over the top. It's very subtle. It's very emotional. I did the tour once. Some women were crying on the tour. So still very raw for a lot of people, and you kind of get reminded when you go back there.
If I have you lean just a little to your left for a second, because right behind you is
Oh
the
yeah.
image, the other,
Can we go?
to
Oh,
your
wrong way.
left.
Okay,
There you go.
yeah. So this is One World Trade. If I
It's
can
the
get my
tower
face-
with the
now I'm all
spire on the
backwards.
top, right?
This is One World
Yeah.
Trade. Yeah, yeah.
And
That's
that's
the
what
building
I
that
think
replaced.
probably most people are familiar now.
Mhm.
And for years now, here we are, and you normally report to TV stations across America what's going on Wall Street, and you do it from the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is, you used to be at Wall Street, and that's where you were on 9/11. NASDAQ is
Yeah.
more toward the center part of town, I guess, if
It's in
that's
Times
what you
Square.
recall.
Yeah, 43rd and Broadway.
But here you are actually doing your reports from home, and so that's where we're reaching you. And the reason I bring it up is, look again. We're talking about the craziness of 2001 and the attack and how New York came back. And now we're in the middle of a pandemic and making all of us change. And you've adapted to being able to do your reports from home as you and I are connecting right now.
Yeah.
Let's just talk, aside from remembering 9/11, let's talk about New York City today. It had, I think, recovered, and as you said earlier, gone back to what we might call normal and thriving. And what is New York City like now today, as we're still in the midst of this pandemic that we thought might have been a 2-week and then a 1-month shutdown, and here we are 6 months later?
Yeah, I was kind of planning for 30 days reporting from home and then kind of going back. And you're right. I mean, here we are, 6 months. I would have never dreamed Labor Day I'd still be here. Well, New York is, I'd say, about 50% open. The mayor and the governor have decided that we can have 25% capacity indoor restaurants starting at the end of September. So that's been a long time. I felt like they could have done that probably a couple of months ago, 25% capacity. Movie theaters are still closed. There's just been, this is a really hard time for New York. I mean, we've seen a lot of small businesses go under. It's a lot of change. Schools are supposed to open on September 21st for 2 days in person. We don't know if that's for sure going to happen or not. It's a very uncertain time. And this is where it's like 9/11, like we just don't feel secure. And I really feel like 9/11, 2001 changed the psyche of America. So if you remember the 90s, it was like we were on top of the world, and the stock market was up, and Friends was popular, and everybody was happy and got along. And then 2001 happened, and the terrorist attacks, and I feel like our psyche permanently changed, and we started to lose confidence in the U.S. government and in institutions. And then we had the financial crisis, and that kind of added to the lack of trust that we had. And now we've really seen that break down, I think, nationally. And I think it really started with 9/11.
It's I was a child when John F. Kennedy was killed, and it was kind of like that in the '60s. It seemed like the world changed on a dime.
Hmm.
From the trajectory the world and everyone thought we were going in, and then Kennedy was killed, and everything changed. So yeah, 9/11, not only just to remember those who killed, but how it changed the world. And here we are still in Afghanistan. President Trump is trying to wind that up and bring the troops home. But 19 years after the troops went into Afghanistan in the wake of 9/11, they're still there.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show how the world has changed. And as we say, now we're in the pandemic and all. You, if you don't mind me bringing up your kids, but just not how how do you think the next generation, your children, as I say, are being raised in the shadow, literally, of the building that replaced
Hmm.
the World Trade Towers? What do you think the next generation, your kids, and all, how are they adapting? Do you talk to them about it? And I'm just kind of curious how people who parent, I think a lot of us who don't live in Manhattan don't think about parenting in there. We think about Wall Street people and, yuppies and that kind of thing. But, you're raising your family there. What impact, if does 9/11 have in the upbringing of your children and the way they view the world?
Well, their school is close to the World Trade Center site, so they learn about it in school. And I remember my son was really moved by a story of the man with the red bandana. So he was an equities trader at the World Trade Towers, about young in his 20s, a young guy. Always wanted to be a firefighter. I think it was a volunteer firefighter wherever he lived. I don't remember if it was upstate New York or New Jersey, maybe. And he saved 18 or 19 people that day, and he wore a red bandana and just kept going back in, getting people, bringing him out, going back in, getting people, bringing him out. And they all told the story of the man with the red bandana. Nobody knew his name. His name is Wells Crowther, which we now know. But my son was really moved by his story because he was a young kid. So my kids do learn about it in school. And I try to make a point to teach them. I mean, I think we have to. I think people forget things. I mean, it's easy for some generations to forget about World War II if you didn't live through that. And I think, the kids today need to learn about what happened on 9/11 too. I work in the mornings, but I'd like for them to watch what I watch, the coverage of it, because I feel like that really takes you back to that day and what everybody was feeling.
We could go on and on. I'm sure there's going to be, of course, as we tape this, there's memorials happening where it's just about marking the exact time when the planes hit the World Trade Tower. And then, of course, there's going to be a ceremony with both the president and Joe Biden, I think, attending out in Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
where the flight went down, brought down by the passengers who fought back. I actually had a chance to visit that ground, and it's a nice memorial to them and an open field. It's for those of us who lived through it, it's an ugly memory. It still brings back those horrible feelings of that day. In fact, you and I will maybe remind you that we were texting back then on that
Hmm.
morning, and you were going to leave Wall Street. We were talking about to go over and cover that, thinking it was just a plane crash.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh my goodness, was Jane killed when the buildings came down? I didn't know until later on. I mean, it was just such a sickening feeling for all of
Yeah.
America to watch what was going on that morning.
Well, and I think about, so you mentioned Shanksville. So the guys that, Todd Beamer and the other guys that took the vote and, stormed the cockpit. And, you think about, so those guys were about my age. So they would have been about 30 in 2001. And, and then I wonder, like, would 30-year-olds now do that? I mean, or have we changed so much as a country that they wouldn't do that? They wouldn't take that step. And, I just don't know. I don't know. People do brave things in extreme situations, but I feel like young people today don't quite have that appreciation for the United States that we did 20 years ago.
Yeah, I know Todd Beamer, who famously said it was captured on the mic, "Let's roll,"
Yeah.
on his phone. That Lisa Beamer, his widow, wrote a book called "Let's Roll," and it captured the spirit of that time because Americans wanted to fight back, and we did.
Hmm.
And it's been a long time, of course. Just now, in the past 4 years or so, and under the President Trump, he's wiped up the caliphate that was established over in Iraq. So that still goes on, but as we remember this day, we want to remember not only those people who lost their lives, those who fought back, but also it seems to me one of the legacies, we got to just always know that we got to be on guard. And it reminded Americans that where we live in a land that has been virtually untouched by war, either World War I, World War II, or any of the others, that we're not, the moat we have around us, the Atlantic and the Pacific, cannot necessarily protect us from all the bad things that can happen. But Jane King, we'll not let you, you've been working all day long from the wee hours of the morning, so we'll let you go. But thank you for joining us and recollecting what happened on 9/11 of 2001. Good for us to remember. By the way, I know you had some boots that had the dust on them from 9/11. Whatever happened? Do you still have those, or what's become of those boots that you wore that day?
So my husband bought like a plexiglass cube to preserve them. So I still have my boots that I walked home in that day, and for the longest time after that, I never wore heels because I remember how they were heeled boots, and I remember how my feet hurt from having to walk so much that day to finally find a train that was operating. So I wore sneakers for a long time because I didn't know. You didn't know, because that time afterwards, remember, everybody was like, "Oh, there's going to be another attack," and get ready. And so it was a nervous time there for a couple of years, actually.
It is something to think about and have for your children to have, those boots from when Mom was there on 9/11, such a Memorial Day.
Okay.
We thank you for joining us and recollecting.
Thanks, Terry. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.